Welcome to Listening with China Blue. This is a podcast that focuses on how listening not only informs us about what is occurring in the world around us, but also helps us connect with others, build stronger businesses, strengthens our mental health, and become more creative and compassionate individuals. As more and more people practice attentive listening in a community, it becomes a community-building practice that strengthens our mental health as we learn from our neighbors. I will be interviewing people from all walks of life to learn how listening has informed them in their field and helped them to make intelligent decisions. They will be artists, musicians, composers, dancers, business people, psychologists, neuroscientists, and Buddhists, to name a few. About me, I'm an internationally exhibiting sound-based artist. In my work, Discovering Unheard Sounds, I realized that the core component that drove my work was simply listening. That realization put me on the path of speaking about and helping people learn to become better listeners. I began with leading sound walks, which I continue to do in the upstate New York region to help people learn to listen from nature. And now, tune your ears to this podcast to learn about the power of listening. And do pay attention until the end for further information on how to start your own listening practice, share it with others, and to support listening with China Blue. Today, we are speaking with Norman Lowry. He is a visual artist and composer whose work is deeply influenced by Pauline Oliveros' investigations in deep listening. Here's a little bit about Norman speaking about himself.
Sounding, listening, connecting, dreaming. I'm an unabashed animist. I believe that everything is infused with what, for want of better word, might be called spirit. There is intelligence at the heart of all matter. Human intelligence is just one peculiar manifestation of this larger ground of being. Other manifestations are radically different, incomprehensible to conventional human sensibilities. Yet all things give voice to the underlying, cohering essence, the spirit of swirling through cells, molecules, atoms, quarks, and superstrings. I messed one thing up. Can I do it again?
Go.
It's all right?
Yeah.
I go again? All right. Sounding, listening, connecting, dreaming. I'm an unabashed animist. I believe that everything is infused with what, for want of better word, might be called spirit. There is intelligence at the heart of all matter. Human intelligence is just one peculiar manifestation of this larger ground of being. Other manifestations are radically different, incomprehensible to conventional human sensibility. Yet all things give voice to the underlying, cohering essence, the spirit swirling through cells, molecules, atoms, quarks, and superstrings. If we listen carefully, we can resonate along with these primary vibrations and receive information, knowledge, altered understanding. This has been the thrust of the teaching by my singing masks that I've been making and employing in ceremonial performances over the past 45 years. Their voices and iconographic presences have been continual reminders of connection with that animistic sense of spirit essence in rivers, rocks, sky, trees, as well as among all things animate. They have become guides in all my work into shifting perspectives, into experiencing everything as holy, as William Blake said, into mythic and oniric, dreamlike reality. The same sensibility has also come to inform my approach to making automata, sculptural instruments, and a variety of multimedia creations. The ceremonial performance pieces inspired by the singing masks are not entertainments in a traditional sense. They are not music, theater, or dance meant to tell a story or lead one along a preconceived path. They are more often invitations to dive into ineffable richness and chaos, even, to discover and explore. Whenever possible, I like to make use of found objects as well as inexpensive materials, including electronics. I've also sometimes incorporated state-of-the-art computer technology to loop and pitch shift the voices of the masks in real time. This can be heard in recordings of some performances. I do not hide the technology, nor do I make much effort to gloss over the inevitable awkward gestures needed to control the devices in my near-blind masked condition. Have an interest in the convergence of the primal and the present, the sacred and the mundane, in the dream time presence of the masks, automata, sculptural instruments, and multimedia. Even the most trivial occurrence may be recognized as having its own kind of perfection and beauty. Dreaming, connecting, listening, sounding.
Norman, it's so great to hear this very concise summary of the work you've been doing for over 45 years. And I'm just so fascinated about your approach that you've taken, as well as how Pauline Oliveros' deep listening work has been a focus for, or maybe I should say a jumping off point for your
Right.
compositions, really, and your masks. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yes, definitely. All of my work is now currently and has been for a long time gratefully embedded in Pauline Oliveros' deep listening. She was a internationally known composer and performer, played the accordion, and the originator of what she labeled deep listening. And it's an entire practice which she began, first of all, with sonic meditations, and then they evolved into what she labeled deep listening. And I studied with her for some time. My interest in sound was preceded my encounter with her, and one of the things that I find really interesting about my path in life is just how the trajectory of my life put me in contact with her, being myself a classically trained composer, and having an interest in sound even before I started composition. And that I ended up meeting her and studying with her and collaborating with her in her deep listening practice, which she defines quite simply originally as listening to everything possible to listen to all the time, no matter what's going on, and to be aware of when you're not listening. And she described that quite naturally as a lifelong process. It's a mindfulness process. And my encounter with her and subsequent work with her over the years, and particularly with the singing masks, which she was fully supportive of, and was one of her. I mean, she's known also as a humanitarian. I mean, her love of life and support for all creative endeavors through her process of deep listening is spreading around the world.
Yeah, I found her to be that way. It's fascinating, her impact on society and culture, which is quite broad, and her focus was just to create a community.
That's what she, said, that she wasn't so much interested in making a career, creating a career, as creating community.
Yeah.
And it certainly is something that is much needed in our troubled times.
Certainly so. So tell us a little bit about, or tell us a lot maybe, about your process. I'm really fascinated about your process and how it evolves, because this has been an ongoing pursuit for you.
Well, yeah, and the process, I'm not sure how well I can describe it. As I mentioned, I've always been interested in sound. I think one of my earliest sound memories, which really fascinated me, was when I was, I don't know, must have been 3, 4, or 5 years old, back in the late 1940s, visiting my grandparents on their farm, and they had a milk house that they had converted into a little room for us kids to play in. And one of the things that they had in there was an original Edison cylinder record player. And I used to go in there listening to, well, they had a limited number of cylinders, but the thing that I remember most vividly is listening to Sousa marches, original recordings on this cylinder.
Oh, how nice.
Record player. And the thing is that, it didn't have any electronics other than the motor. Well, wait a minute. It was a crank motor. You cranked it up, and then you could get it running. And it had a big, what we call a horn, coming off the needle to amplify the sound. And the thing is that what I remember is I was, I loved listening to the Sousa marches, but I was also interested in the scratchy sounds that were created by this ancient device.
So very early on, you were listening to all things all the time.
Yeah.
And everywhere.
And that's why I say it's really interesting to me to see the trajectory of my life, the path of my life that led me to meet up with Pauline and you, and anyway, so that interest in sound, my mother was a musician, my father was a painter and an artist, although he ended up not being able to do that professionally. My mother taught me piano at an early age, although I didn't continue with it. And they always had music playing, and I was led, for one reason or another, maybe because of their the repertoire of records that they had, old 78s, into a primary interest in classical, what we call classical music. And played clarinet and in orchestra and bands, and continued with that. And that was my my primary interest at an early age. Then when I was in high school, maybe because I was so much involved with music making, I started dreaming music, dreaming my own music. And, when I woke up, of course, I couldn't remember what it was that I had dreamed. I only knew that I was dreaming my own music. And I thought, well, wait a minute, I can do that. So I started, actually, I wrote some, simple solo pieces for some friends, but pretty readily on, I wrote something for orchestra that my high school orchestra played, and that led me further into an interest in realizing, I guess, what was going through my head. Both in dreams and, when I sat down, I would have to use the piano to work out the notes. And I eventually, majored in music when I was in college. I went on to the Eastman School of Music, got my Ph.D. in composition. And another really important contribution to my direction was an introduction to, when I was at Eastman School of Music, to Harry Partch, who was a great individualist composer back in the 40s and 50s and into the 60s, who made all of his own instruments.
Oh, wonderful. And
they're just super instruments, and they're amazing instruments. And he created large-scale performance pieces with them, and which incorporated dance, and the performers actually had to dance and be on stage and make movements, and it was like a multimedia experience. And I actually got to see those instruments when I was out in California. I went out to California and on my first teaching gig, and that's where his instruments were, in San Diego. And that's where I met Pauline, in San Diego.
Oh, nice.
So
today, though, when we were chatting about this, you had mentioned that your work is a process of discovering connection.
Yeah, I was getting to that.
Oh, I'm sorry if I jumped the gun.
No, that's all right. I mean, I've already said it in that artist statement that I read, connection. So I guess, to kind of make a summarization of what I was saying and leading to, is that for me, making what we might call music or sound structures. I also define myself as a sound artist and not just a composer. Meeting Pauline and other factors led me to being more interested in making discoveries about things and using those discoveries to make connections with all life, in a sense, but through listening to trees, listening to, yes, rocks. What? Do rocks sing? Well, yes. Back when I was in California, one of my wonderful students, David Dunn, and I were driving along the coast, and I shouted out to him, "Everything sings!" And that's and one reason why I ended up naming my mask Singing Masks and not Sounding Masks. I think everything sings if we really listen, and it's really, I mean, everything is vibration, right? Of course, much of that vibration is not audible as such, but in Pauline's work in deep listening, it's not so much, yes, what we hear with our ears is important, but it's our whole body. And as she talks about, listening is different from hearing. Hearing is, what we do with our ears and, of course, our sensing vibrations with our bodies. But listening is applying our thinking processes, which I think, and she thought too, were not just part of what we define as the brain. I mean, she incorporated through Ione, her partner, dreams, and Eloise Gold, another partner, worked with her in teaching deep listening, movement, Tai Chi. So listening is more than through the ears. And for me, it's been a process of applying that training to making connections with all that I encounter, and allowing those connections to resonate somehow internally in dream state, oniric process, and in my imagination, leading me to create things, not so much to control the medium of creation, whether it's sound or, like with the masks, visual, not to control as I used to with writing down notes, not to control and manipulate sounds in such a way as to generate particular reactions, but to explore, to connect, explore, or put it the other way, explore, connect, and allow that connection and exploration to build up some kind of, as I've stated, maybe a wave that crests and breaks open into new revelations, new understanding. So my creative work is all about exploring the world, exploring life, exploring the universe, and sharing that, when I can, to whoever wants to participate with it in some way, listen to it, be part of my ceremonial performance, as I've described it. and to be a part of it and explore with me, and hopefully with a direction of, well, this is what I can do. This is what I can do in the world to bring, I hope, some kind of joy, some kind of sense of greater understanding, and particularly connection, greater connection, not only amongst us human beings. Oh, I didn't stop that clock. I stopped 2 other clocks.
That's okay.
Anyway, that's what happens. Connection and
you had mentioned
well,
to me in passing that you think of it as a kind of improvisation with the world.
that's the word I was trying to just
Yeah.
thinking of when the clock struck whatever it is. That's part of the improvisation. And this was another, of course, thing that Pauline contributed, because all of her work is improvisatory. Well, I shouldn't say all of her work. She also is quite capable of writing notes. But a vast number of her scores are what we now know of as text scores, which are kind of instructions for performance. Of course, that's what a score is. It's an instruction for doing something. But a vast amount of that is improvisatory, free-form improvisation within a given structure. And so I think of my work not only making connection, but as I don't know, I should put it in these terms or not, a grand improvisation of life.
Why not?
Yeah, why not?
Just go there.
It's the way I live, and really, I mean, isn't that what we all do? We make plans, but we never know what's going to happen. And to learn how to deal with whatever comes up, and to play with it, using the word play not only meaning, all happy, funny, joyful, but playing in a serious sense, playful seriousness, to play and to interact with, to become a part of, to become one with. And I was going to say, back when I was just talking about connection, I started saying connection not only with human life, but with all life, with cats, with birds, with
the clock,
and rocks, and everything. And to
do you see interaction then as one version of connection?
No, definitely. And as Pauline developed that into a really extraordinarily rich community of listeners, my own path has been, I have more difficulty. I mean, I've worked with groups. I taught, in college for 45 years with classes, and did things with all kinds of things with students. And and I still do things with groups, but much of my work is solitary. And I share that. But I'm doing things with groups too. I just did a performance thing with a organization in Regensburg, Germany, over Zoom.
Nice.
And of course did performances, did what I labeled, coming from Ione, dream action theater, with the event celebrating Pauline's birthday last week, and the release of one of her projects, Aomi, the alternative use musical instruments. So I can ramble on and on and on. Do you have other specific questions?
Well, yeah, I'm quite interested in focusing more specifically about how you engage your act of being an observant and your process of listening into your actual creation and engagement with the masks. The masks obviously create with the masks you create a sound or soundings, but preceding that or concurrent with that, I assume that you're engaged with a form of heightened perception or observation.
Yeah. Well, first of all, maybe I should say something about the origin of the masks.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a kind of weird thing to come to, having been classically trained, but having an interest in sound as I have. I met up back in the late 70s with a ceramic sculptor, Marion Held, who's in New Jersey, and visited her at her home and was looking at her sculptures. She, at that time, was making kind of large-scale ceramic pieces, tall, about 4 or 5 feet tall, which is pretty big for ceramic.
Sure.
And when I visited her, I said, I won't hurt these, but I'd like to tap on them. So I started tapping on them, and they made nice resonant sounds. But also she had some apertures. They were like Stonehenge pieces.
Oh.
Small Stonehenge, really that kind of earthy clay, glazed clay. And there were some apertures in them, and I discovered, little holes. And just like a flute, I discovered that I could blow across them and make them sound. Well, that led to a collaboration that we did, an exhibit at Drew University, and I did some installations. I recorded the sounds that I made with the sculptures and played them back, put speakers in the sculptures. But I also started making my own instruments, and the most obvious thing to make was like clay flutes.
Sure.
My flutes were kind of in sculptural forms, rather like shell forms, and they kept getting bigger and bigger. And I realized one day when I was playing one, I know I'm making these, I can't help make these gestures on Zoom, which, nobody will see, but I realized, well, this mask is this flute is covering my face. It's a mask. And that was one of those, as we hope, we all have throughout our lives these kind of aha moments. And that was one of them, because I'd never heard of of masks having sounds in them. You know, I've done some research since, and there has been some of that done, but it's pretty rare. So the very next flute that I made, I actually made a mask and built the flute into the mask, and I'm going to play that now so you can hear it. And it will sound, of course, just like a clay flute, an ocarina as we call it, which is actually little goose in Italian. Is that right? Yeah, something like that. Anyway, and this has, to describe it, it has a facial physiognomy, but it also is kind of abstract. And somebody just said, looking at this for the first time, that it sort of looked like a turtle shell, and it sort of does. And it has some protrusions on it at the cheeks, which are one of which is actually the flute. So nice. I'll play it.
Very nice. Oh, how beautiful.
And, from the start, with that mask, when I would play it for, not everyone, but there were some people I played it for, and there was something about combining the sound with the image that struck a really deep, what maybe could be described as archetypal connection.
Oh, nice.
With something going way back in time. And that experience I also had. And it led me then to, this is the direction that I'm taking. And I just started making more masks. As long as I had access to a kiln through Marion Held, I made ceramic masks. Mm-hmm. And then that ended, and I then made carved wooden masks, all of them having voices of one kind or another. I have another one that I have right here that I was going to play just to demonstrate.
Oh, please. And
people won't be able to see this, but this is a mask called Inuiua, which is a Tlingit word, which is the word that they use for mask, but it literally means images person. So we could say that it's the person in the image, right? Image is person. And this one has, I don't know whether you'll be able to determine what it is. I'll play it and
well,
see
before
if you can tell what it is.
Norman, before you put it on, it would be great to describe it because it looks very much like a person. The other one was a little bit more abstract, but this is, it has two holes for the eyes, eyebrows, a nose, and a hole for the mouth. It's very elongated mask with a beautiful spherical shape that goes from left to right, sort of like a quasi halo. with bells on the end.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course it has those entwined snakes on it.
Right, right. Snakes. And then the dots are those stars?
Well, they're just dots.
With just dots.
Yeah, they're stars. And you're describing the shape of it. It's got a big nose.
Yeah, it does.
And I have to say that this is another part of my process of making connection. It was less obvious with the clay, but certainly with wood. This is a piece of wood I found.
Oh.
This is basswood. And so all my masks, images, for the most part, there are some that have arrived from preconceived notions out of requests for a certain kind of a certain mask. But the majority of my masks arise out of the materials.
Very nice.
Right? And so now this is the voice. Can you tell what it is?
It sounds almost like a harmonica.
It is a harmonica reed. And I mean, the inside is very crude, but I have a harmonica reed embedded in a tube that is what I blow into. So all the masks have their own voice. And in answer, going back to your question, early on, from when I first started making the masks, and involving, then it was primarily students who we had ensemble of masks, and we created pieces that had instructions for what to do in a kind of performance. And like for that first collaboration, in which I only had that first mask, whose name is Earth Singer, and the name was derived from the collaboration exhibit that Marion and I did, that she had labeled Earth Song, given her earthy sculptures. And I then created a piece with students that had specific, I actually wrote out notes, because then the clay flute mat, they played clay flutes. I played Earth Singer. That was the only mask that I had at that time. But this kind of thing continued on for a while. I wrote out notes given the clay flutes that they had, and they performed them. And then eventually, and particularly meeting up more prominently with Pauline in the late 80s, when she was doing deep listening, for her first deep listening workshops. And I went to one of them and introduced her to my masks, and she was taken by them and set up a workshop for me. And then I started doing pieces that were more what I've ended up calling ceremonial performance. Not so much performance, but inviting people. So they're like little ceremonies. They're improvisatory. They have text scores. They all begin with listening, inviting people to listen and participate in various ways through movement or sounding, along with what I'm doing, and the masks then function as guides. I referred to them in my artist statement as teachers. They've been teaching me because they're all, and you know, I've used the term. I've said that they are for me vehicles of transformation. They function for me as getting into a different mind. And that's, for me, another kind of extension of connection. It's connecting with the mind, the spirit of everything. I think everything has mind in one way or another.
Well, it's so fascinating to hear your process of how listening is not only an activity that you engage with your body as well as your ears, but it's also something that you've embraced as a process that becomes the stimulant for creating these works. And then because they produce sounds, they engage also the audience or the other listeners in your group to be attentive to and participate in. And so I see this as a whole big constellation of connections from the body to the self, to the creative process, to the people around you, and then to your students, and how it emanates through this group of people, creating a community of listeners who are being taught a new way to be attentive to the world.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way to put it. There are a couple of words that sort of struck me that you use. Stimulant. Yeah, that's good. I was thinking of something else which I can't actually come up with now. And teaching, for me, it's sharing, not teaching. And you know, the masks are sharing their minds with me, if I can be so abstract about it. It's sharing the connection, and you were saying it was leading to as a stimulant, but my process leads to just a welcoming, a welcoming of finding a way to connect, and that is, you know, stimulating.
Yeah. Oh, Norman, this has been great. We've completely run out of time, and I want to continue this conversation again with you on another day. But I want to thank you so much for all of this great insights into your world and your vision of creating and stimulating a community. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, China Blue. I'm so delighted to participate in your wonderful endeavor here, and it is a way to further the value of learning to listen.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Listening with China Blue. I hope it inspires you to build your own listening practice. This begins as a daily practice of attentively listening without judgment. And ask yourself, what is your version of silence? If you want to learn more about me and my work, go to chinablueart.com, and please follow me on Facebook and at Instagram. Thank you.